On a warm evening at an upscale restaurant in the heart of New York, the air was filled with bustling energy, and the soft sound of wine being poured mingled with the soothing tunes of a piano playing in the corner of the room. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress, moved gracefully between the tables, carrying a polite smile. But in her eyes, there was always a gleam of a greater ambition. She was not just a server. She was an artist, with a burning passion for music. She had sacrificed much to continue pursuing that dream. And tonight, a new challenge awaited her. One that could change everything in her life. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress at the Grand Table, one of the most prestigious restaurants in New York, wasn't exactly a striking figure, but her bright eyes and calm, deliberate movements always made a strong impression on the guests. She didn't work as a waitress just for the income. It was her burning passion for music that kept her going. Growing up in a small town in South Carolina, where dreams of a music career seemed distant and nearly impossible, Deborah had always found solace and freedom in the keys of the piano. She still remembered those nights when she would play in the small family room, where music became the bridge between her and dreams that seemed out of reach. Her family had little, but music always brought warmth and hope to their lives. However, as adulthood approached, Deborah realized that her dream of a music career would have to be put on hold. Working as a waitress at the Grand Table was the only way she could make a living and keep her passion for music alive, despite the limited time she had to play. On an evening like any other, the restaurant suddenly became more lively when a special guest entered. Leonard Grayson, a millionaire known for his arrogance and sarcastic attitude toward others, walked in with a group of friends. Looking at Leonard, Deborah could sense the self-satisfaction radiating off him, as if nothing could ever concern him. They exchanged glances for a brief moment, and immediately, Deborah felt something was off. She knew that Leonard wouldn't be just another ordinary customer. When Leonard entered the Grand Table, his eyes quickly scanned the room as if he were the center of attention. People in the room looked at him with respect, and no one could ignore the air of superiority in the way he walked. Holding his expensive leather briefcase, his face always adorned with a smug expression. His friends were equally impressive, and they all seemed to admire Leonard, making the atmosphere in the room even more stifling. Deborah continued with her duties, moving skillfully between the tables, serving food and drinks, but her eyes couldn't help but follow Leonard. She could feel that he was the type of customer she would have to deal with for the entire evening, one who constantly tested the patience of those around him. And as if that wasn't enough, Leonard began his performance as soon as he sat down at the table. With a loud voice, Leonard began recounting stories of his career, each word dripping with arrogance and condescension. His friends laughed and cheered him on, but the air in the restaurant grew heavy. Deborah, who had dealt with difficult customers before, tried to maintain her composure. She ignored Leonard's noise and focused on her work. However, as she placed a bottle of wine on Leonard's table, he looked up at her and smiled before suddenly speaking. "Deborah, right?" he said, his voice laced with curiosity. "You seem like a girl with potential. Do you have any talents besides just serving food to us?" The unexpected question caught Deborah off guard. She looked up at Leonard and could feel the mockery in his gaze. "I play piano sometimes," she replied briefly, hoping to end the conversation quickly. She didn't want to stand out. She just wanted to do her job and move on with her life. But Leonard wouldn't let it go. He smiled and continued. Surely you're not just an ordinary waitress. You play piano, huh? I think we deserve to hear a song. Go ahead and play for us, Deborah. Maybe you'll surprise us. Leonard's group burst into laughter, and some nearby guests turned to look. She could feel all eyes on her. She wanted to refuse, to escape the spotlight, but the pressure of the moment seemed to force her to respond. Though her heart raced with confusion, she tried to maintain her composure. She had faced many challenges in life, but she had never felt such humiliation as she did now. "No, I'm just a waitress," she said, trying to avoid Leonard's gaze and turning to walk away. But Leonard wasn't done with her. He spoke again, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I guess I was wrong. A person who has nothing but a piano and still doesn't dare to play. You're probably just someone who talks about talent, but doesn't really have it." Leonard's words hit Deborah like a slap. She felt as though someone had pushed her into a corner. She couldn't let him treat her like a joke anymore. Self-doubt surged within her, but instead of bowing her head, a spark of resolve suddenly flickered inside her. In that moment, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everything she had endured, for all the dreams left unfulfilled. The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to change instantly. The hushed conversations gradually faded, replaced by expectant glances, not only from Leonard's group, but also from the surrounding guests. Deborah could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, as if each one was a sharp, piercing gaze. She could sense Leonard's mockery, from every word he spoke to the way he smirked, as if waiting for her to fail. But this only made her heart burn with greater intensity. She glanced toward the piano, which now seemed like a bridge between respect and humiliation, between self-preservation and surrender. Her fingers trembled, but she refused to allow herself to back down. Each step toward the piano was a battle with herself, a resurgence of determination rising from deep within her. When she sat at the grand piano, the light from the chandelier reflected in soft golden hues, creating an ambiance that seemed to touch her very soul. She had sat in places like this before, at small concerts in church, or during tiny performances she participated in when she was a young girl. But this time was different. This time she wasn't just playing to showcase her talent. She was playing to prove her worth. At first, her fingers gently touched the keys, as if searching for a familiar feeling. The first notes of Clair de Lune echoed softly, like a gentle wave rippling across a still lake. Though nervous, her calmness gradually surfaced, allowing her to guide the emotions of the piece. The entire room fell silent, leaving only the sound of the piano ringing through the air. Under the shimmering lights, all eyes were fixed on her, and Leonard's mocking words seemed to fade away. Each finger on the keys was a defiance, a steady step forward, not just to repay Leonard's mockery, but also to respond to anyone who had ever doubted her abilities. The notes in Clair de Lune weren't just melodies. They were the steps she had taken, the dreams she had been pushed away from, but had never allowed to be defeated. As she entered the climax of the piece, the sound grew stronger, filled with emotion, as though trying to tear apart the tension in the room. The high and low notes fused together, pulling everyone into her world. The guests at the tables stopped eating and paused their conversations. No one dared to whisper. The gazes now were no longer mocking, but filled with admiration. Leonard, who had once ridiculed her, now sat silently, his face no longer smug, but instead filled with an unmasked surprise. The entire room seemed to drift into Deborah's space, where only she and the music remained. Her fingers glided across the keys, as if all her emotions, hopes, and life's struggles were being transmitted through each note. The delicate melodies and the flowing harmonies seemed to captivate everyone, pulling them into the story she was telling through her piano. The atmosphere had completely shifted, from the initial tension and mockery to a quiet reverence. When the piece ended, Deborah remained silent for a moment, as though she were reliving each wave of emotion she had just experienced. Her hands still rested on the keys, and the room remained hushed, as if absorbing the resonance of the music. The guests seemed at a loss for words, but then, like a crashing wave, applause erupted from every corner of the room. The patrons could no longer remain quiet. They stood clapping, offering their admiration and respect for her. Deborah stood from the bench, her face calm, but her eyes sparkling with pride. There were no more mocking laughs or jeers. All eyes were now on her, no longer with disdain, but with respect. Leonard, sitting silently in his chair, couldn't hide his bewildered expression, unsure of how to react. His friends exchanged awkward glances, unwilling to continue their earlier teasing. The silence that followed Deborah's performance spread throughout the room. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed, shifting from tension and suffocation to respect and admiration. The patrons could no longer contain their emotions, and waves of applause filled the space, resonating throughout the room. However, Leonard remained seated in silence, unable to offer any response. His eyes were wide open, yet they betrayed his stunned and confused state. Leonard, who had once taken pride in his power and wealth, now found himself an outsider, witnessing the dramatic shift in the space he had once believed he controlled. In stark contrast to his previous arrogance and mockery, he now sat there, motionless, clapping reluctantly. His applause was faint, not booming like the others, almost as if he didn't know what to do with himself. As the applause from the guests and Deborah's colleagues began to subside, their gazes shifted from curiosity to admiration. Deborah's co-workers, who had witnessed Leonard's earlier ridicule of her, now looked at her with different eyes. The surprise in their eyes transformed into pride. She had done what no one had thought possible. Not only had she stood up for herself, but she had also showcased a talent that even the wealthiest and most powerful could not ignore. One of Deborah's colleagues, a longtime waitress, smiled at her from afar, her eyes filled with encouragement and admiration. She understood that Deborah had not only overcome Leonard's challenge, but had also proven that people like her, no matter their position, could achieve greatness if they had enough faith in themselves. The guests continued to shower Deborah with compliments. A woman sitting at a nearby table said, "You were incredible. I've never heard a performance so full of emotion. Thank you for giving us such a beautiful moment." Others agreed, and an older man seated near the piano added, "If you're not an artist, I don't know who else could deserve that title. You moved us. Keep chasing your dreams." The praise from those around her only boosted Deborah's confidence. She didn't need Leonard's approval or anyone else's, but hearing the recognition from those who truly understood and respected art made her feel that she had done the right thing. All the nerves and doubts she had before had vanished. replaced by a calm pride that she couldn't hide. As for Leonard, he no longer appeared arrogant. The self-satisfaction had completely disappeared, replaced by a clear sense of shame. He couldn't face his friends, nor could he find a way to continue the jokes or casual conversation from before. The realization that he had been wrong, that he had underestimated others, began to swell within him. He turned away, avoiding eye contact, trying not to let anyone see the shame in his eyes. Leonard realized he could no longer continue this conversation casually. He sat still, his face cold, his hands awkwardly tapping on the table. For the first time in his life, he felt he had no power in a space he had always believed he could manipulate. The applause around him only deepened his sense of loneliness in his defeat. Leonard had failed, not because Deborah played the piano better than him, but because he had been too arrogant and had failed to recognize the true value of those around him. Finally, after a long moment of silence, Leonard gave a forced, mocking smile, trying to break the heavy silence. "I guess talent can come from the most unexpected places," he said. But his words sounded weak, a feeble attempt to regain his confidence, even though he had been deeply shaken inside. This exchange could not hide the shift in Leonard. The mocking words he had spoken earlier no longer had any power. Deborah had proven that true talent couldn't be judged by appearances or societal prejudices. She had won, not by reacting to Leonard, but by showing him the quiet strength and determination within herself. The atmosphere in the restaurant gradually returned to normal after the relentless applause, but the gaze of the patrons remained fixed on Deborah, as though they had just witnessed a miracle. Yet Leonard still hadn't come to terms with his defeat. He took a deep breath and looked at Deborah with an air of arrogance, trying to reclaim some of the power he had lost. However, he could not hide the confusion in his eyes. The silence that now enveloped the room was not a show of authority, but a sign of weakness that was slowly starting to emerge. In a final attempt to restore his image, Leonard opened his mouth, but his words came out as nothing more than a feeble attempt to maintain the smugness that had already crumbled. "I can't believe you can play the piano like that," he said, his tone tinged with bitterness, clearly insincere. "I thought you were just an ordinary waitress." Deborah didn't pay any attention to his words. She looked at Leonard, directly, unwavering. She was no longer the weak woman she once was. She stood tall, resolute. "Leonard," Deborah began, her voice calm and filled with confidence, "my talent isn't for meeting anyone else's expectations. It's a gift I carry within me. I don't need to prove my worth to you or anyone else. My value belongs to me, and I don't need recognition from people like you." Her words hit Leonard like a sharp sword, severing all his arrogance and leaving him speechless. She didn't need to argue or offer criticism. Her calmness and strength spoke louder than anything she could have said. Her words were full of power, not just a response, but a powerful affirmation of who she was. She no longer cared about Leonard's opinion of her. She had come to understand that true strength didn't lie in seeking approval from others, but in recognizing her own worth. Deborah had won, not only in this moment, but also by reclaiming control over her own life. She had freed herself from societal prejudices, from the ridicule of others, and finally, she had found her own path. Looking ahead, Deborah felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. She knew that music was not just a hobby. It was a calling she needed to follow. She was no longer just a waitress trying to make a living. She was an artist, someone with talent and passion that could never be hidden or defeated. From now on, she wouldn't just live for herself. She would live to prove that anyone could break through barriers and find strength within themselves. That night, as she left the restaurant and stepped outside under the starry New York sky, Deborah no longer felt alone or afraid. She knew her journey was just beginning. Music would always be an essential part of her life. And now, she would never let anyone or anything stop her. She picked up her phone and saw a message from a music producer she had never expected to hear from. A new opportunity was waiting for her, and Deborah knew that this was the turning point she had been searching for. Deborah's message to you: life will always challenge you in unexpected ways, but never let anyone determine your worth. Talent and passion are priceless gifts, and you don't need to prove them to anyone. Be true to yourself, chase your dreams, and always believe that you deserve every success. Because, as Deborah learned, confidence and resilience are the greatest strengths you can have. Share Deborah's story and your own. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back. Comment below about your dreams, where you live, and the challenges you're facing. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow more inspiring and motivating stories. Be the first to discover the next steps in Deborah's exciting musical journey.